Now, I've been studying women's rights work in the Middle East for years, and I'm convinced that there are limits to the framework of rights they use, even if pursued in the newest form, the sort of latest, more indigenous or faith-based form of initiatives that are meant to reform Muslim family law or promote and publicize gender egalitarian interpretations of the Quran. These cultural forms can't capture the complexity of life, of her life situation, this girl's life, young woman's life situation, or enable us to disentangle the strands of her suffering, or offer a solution to her complicated problems. And it seems to me that if we don't consider the larger political and structural problems of global inequalities of wealth, wars and occupations, and local undemocratic regimes propped up by foreign powers, usually the US, even when they don't serve their populations, producing insecurity, poverty, unemployment, inadequate schooling, or medical care, we can't understand why women like her have so few options and live in basic conditions that sometimes produce domestic violence. So in other words, as long as we focus on personal violence of the gendered domestic sphere as if it were detached from the larger global political field, and as long as we selectively blame other cultures or religions for women's suffering without attention to the larger structures in which families and women live their lives, structures that I'm arguing, and actually I've argued for years, we in the metropole and especially in the United States are actually hugely responsible for creating, either through wars or the perpetuation of global inequalities from which we benefit enormously. We won't be able to solve anything, though I think many of us professional women will make good livings thinking about it and providing some help to some poor individual women who might be pitied as victims of their cultures, their traditions, their families, and their local communities. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I do it?
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm Esther Hyneman. I'm on the board of Women for Afghan Women, which is a grassroots women's human rights organization. I spend about 6 months a year in Afghanistan. We have a community outreach program in Queens, New York, where we work with a group of women and their children, mostly immigrants from Afghanistan. Some have been here for 30 years or more. Many of them come from conservative families, and what we do is have classes for them. We hope to empower these women because in many cases their daughters are fated to have the kind of lives, lack of education and so forth that their mothers have experienced. We have a number of programs in Afghanistan. We have built schools for Afghanistan, for women and for girls, and we have literacy classes for women, vocational training classes for women. Our flagship program in Afghanistan now is called the Family Guidance Center. The first one opened in Kabul in early 2007. It's a counseling mediation center which also employs lawyers to help women who have to appear in court, who are either charged with crimes or who are seeking redress against the violations. And we have a shelter that is attached to the Family Guidance Center, not physically attached. It's in another part of town, but it's an essential part of the Family Guidance Center because if it's not safe for our clients to go home, they have to stay in the shelter. And some of them stay for a couple of weeks, and others have stayed for as long as 2 years. We have now expanded the Family Guidance Center to 4 other provinces. There's one in Kapisa, one in Mazar, one in Jalalabad, and one in Kunduz. When I say one, I mean the combination counseling center and shelter. We also recently opened a children's support center last November. In the children's support center, it's a residence for children who had been living with their mothers in the Kabul prison. Some of them had been born in the prison, and had lived there all of their lives with their mothers who are inmates. I'd love to tell you about that, but it's off the topic. The question here is whether cultures are really violent or whether there are larger societal circumstances such as race, class, ethnicity, etc. at play. I found that sort of confusing because race, class, ethnicity, those are all part of culture, and I don't think you can say culture is over here separate from all of these other elements. I think if there was ever a test case of violence against women, that test case is Afghanistan. And what happens to women in Afghanistan, what happens to everybody in Afghanistan in the future, it seems to me is extremely important for us as women and for women all over the world. I think part of what I'm going to say about Afghanistan, especially toward the end of my comments, may surprise you, but they're sort of in line with what Lila has already said. What violence are we really talking about in Afghanistan? Are we talking about the war, or are we talking about human rights violations against women apart from the war? I don't like to use the word domestic violence, by the way. I don't even like the word violence particularly because it suggests physical violence. And physical violence is just one kind of violence against women in Afghanistan. Our clients certainly suffer domestic violence, torture, honor killings, threats of honor killings, and actual honor killings, rape and other sexual violations such as trafficking. They are forced into marriages when they are very young, and underage marriages when they're 8 or 9. We have many clients, little girls who are forced into marriage. We have many children who are sold to men and who have escaped or given away as restitution for crimes. Now, the real question is, why do these human rights violations exist? Is it ingrained? Are they ingrained in the culture? Or can we determine other reasons for the widespread violations against women in Afghanistan? Part of it, of course, is tradition. Part of it is the tribal culture. But there are many other reasons for this situation against women in Afghanistan, which is, by the way, dire. The entire country, you might say, is suffering from post-traumatic syndrome. The entire country has been at war for 30 years and still counting. Security, which in the early part of this century after the Taliban left seemed far better than it had been for years, is rapidly deteriorating, and people are afraid. There is terrible poverty throughout the country. There is a 40% unemployment rate. This is after the United States and its development aid has been active in Afghanistan for 9 years. There is a deep depression among people because of its government, because of the corruption in the government, because the government has not responded to the needs of the people, because of disappointment. People's expectations in Afghanistan in 2002 and 2003 were extremely high. They were really ready for a new life. They were ready for progress. They were ready for change. And that has not happened, partly because of the failure of U.S. policy there and partly because of the corruption of the government, which of course are linked. Religion is part of it, but Islam is misrepresented to the people. You know, there's maybe 80% of the people are illiterate. What they believe about Islam is what they're told to believe by people in power, by mullahs, by warlords, by Taliban, by you name it. Whoever has a vested interest in misinterpreting Islam to the people are actively engaged in misinterpreting Islam to the people in Afghanistan. What is it that the people want? Well, I haven't done a survey of Afghan people, but we see a lot of people. We have had almost 2,000 clients and their families. By the way, we treat men. That subject has come up a lot during discussions here today. When we first opened, we said that we wanted to bring men in and counsel and men mediate with whole families, and we were laughed at. We were told that'll kill you, that idea will never work, they'll laugh at you, men will never step foot there. Well, they were wrong. Men come all the time. They call us up. They want to talk to their counselors. Any day of the week, you'll find men outside the Family Guidance Center sitting on benches with their beards and their turbans and their shalwar kameezes, waiting to see their counselors. We were told this is a Western idea. It's like therapy. No, we don't do psychoanalysis. We don't really do therapy. We just counsel. We talk. Our counselors are not trained social workers. They're very courageous men and women who try to solve problems with the help of the clients themselves. And families want peace. Most of them who come to us want a peaceful resolution to their problems, and they want to talk. They don't see us as interfering heretics from the West. Actually, I'm the only person who's not in the organization, in the family guidance centers when I'm there. I'm the only non-local Afghan. We employ now about 150 local Afghans. And as I said, they're not trained social workers. And that may be part of our success because they try to solve problems. They're very creative, very imaginative, and they're not tied to rules and regulations about procedures. The subjugation of women in Afghanistan, in my opinion, is the kind of foundation or the basis of the power of the Taliban and the warlords. The claim that the basis is in religion is simply a red herring. It's not true. It's a strategy for acquiring power. If you can keep 50% of a population on its knees, you have much easier access to power. And that's, I believe, what's happening. The warlords, whom the United States has supported for the last, 30 years and continues to support, who are in parliament, as you all know, are just about as bad as the Taliban when it comes to the repression of women. And it's because they are vying for power in the country, just as the Taliban are vying for power. And keeping women suppressed, keeping women subjugated is a very, and engaging the male population of the country in helping them is a very fast route to power. We were very upset, Women for Afghan Women, the organization, were quite upset when, during those 3 or so months when Obama was considering whether to send troops into Afghanistan, because he never talked about the situation of women there. Never. The word women never crossed his lips for 3 months. And I spoke to people in Washington who said, I expressed our concerns, and they said, don't worry, he's going to talk about women, and he never talked about women. And even in the speech that he gave the night he talked about the surge, he never, I think maybe in one sentence he used the word women, but otherwise he did not talk about it. It's important, I think, to note that we need to focus on the situation of women in Afghanistan, not only for humanitarian and human rights reasons, but also for the issue of security, because these two issues are closely linked